All right, let's dive into a literary mystery that has fascinated scholars for centuries. The clues? Well, they're hiding in plain sight, right inside three of the most famous books ever written, the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke.
So, to see what I mean, let's just jump right in with a case file. Take the story of the healing of a leper. It shows up in all three of these Gospels. Now, it's not just that they tell the same story. Look at the dialogue. The phrasing is so similar. I mean, sometimes it's literally word for word. It's kind of shocking, really.
And that right there is our central question. Think about it. If three people witness the same car crash and write about it, you'd expect the basic facts to line up, for sure, but you wouldn't expect them to use the exact same sentences. That feels less like three separate reports and more like, well, like they were looking at each other's notes. So what's going on here? To solve this puzzle, we've got to gather our clues. And the very first clue is understanding what these books even are. We call them Gospels, right? But that word itself tells us a whole lot about what their authors were trying to do. You know, the word gospel basically just means good news. These books were never meant to be modern biographies, detailing every single day of Jesus' life. Their goal was much more specific. As the original eyewitnesses started to pass away, these accounts were written to preserve their teachings and to proclaim why the story of Jesus was such good news. And that brings us to another key term you hear all the time, synoptic. It's from Greek, and it literally just means to see together. Syn, like in synchronize, and optic, like, view. We call Matthew, Mark, and Luke the Synoptic Gospels precisely because they tell the story from such a similar viewpoint. It's a shared perspective that's really different from the fourth Gospel, John, which kind of does its own thing. Okay, so now we know the kind of literature we're dealing with, let's get to the hard data. This is where the mystery really deepens because the overlap between these three books, it's absolutely staggering. Let me just throw a number at you. 506. Mark's Gospel has 661 verses in total. A whopping 506 of them also show up in Matthew's Gospel. Just let that sink in for a second. More than 3/4 of Mark's entire book is found in Matthew. This isn't just a casual similarity. This is a serious literary connection. And this chart just makes it crystal clear. When you map it all out, you see that almost the entirety of Mark's Gospel is also in Matthew or Luke. When you add it all up, only about 5% of Mark, we're talking just 31 verses, is totally unique to him. The rest of it was clearly source material for the other two writers. And it's not just about the verses. They all share the same narrative spine. They follow the exact same basic sequence of events, from John the Baptist to the ministry in Galilee, all the way to the crucifixion and resurrection. It's the same fundamental story, told in the same fundamental order. Okay, so we've seen the evidence, the identical phrasing, the massive content overlap, the shared story structure. All the clues are pointing in one direction. It's time for the big reveal. Let's solve the synoptic puzzle. Now, this whole investigation, this big question of how these three books relate to each other, it actually has an official name. Scholars call it the synoptic problem, and they've been debating the best way to solve it for generations. The solution that most scholars agree on is called the four-document hypothesis. Sounds fancy, but it's actually pretty simple. Here's how it breaks down. Step 1. Mark wrote his gospel first. He's the OG, the primary source for the story's narrative. Step 2, scholars figured there must have been another source, a lost collection of Jesus' sayings that they call Q. How do they know? Because Matthew and Luke share hundreds of verses of sayings that are not in Mark. So steps 3 and 4 are pretty logical. Matthew and Luke both used Mark for the story's flow and Q for the sayings. Then each of them added their own unique material, stuff scholars just call M and L, to craft their final distinct gospels. So this theory does a great job explaining the similarities. But it brings up a new question, right? If Matthew and Luke were just using the same sources, why bother writing their own gospels? Why are they still different? Well, the answer comes down to their motive and their method. They weren't just copying, they were tailoring the story. The best way to think about it is like this. Imagine 3 reporters covering the same big event, but for totally different newspapers. They all have the same core facts, but they're going to shape the story for their readers. That's what's happening here. Matthew, writing for a Jewish community, frames Jesus as the promised Messiah king. Mark, writing for a Roman audience, presents Jesus as a powerful, suffering servant.
And Luke, writing for a non-Jewish audience, portrays Jesus as the compassionate savior for everyone. Same story, but 3 unique portraits for 3 specific communities.
So what's the big takeaway from all this? Well, this ancient puzzle shows us something really powerful. The Gospels themselves show that one core story can, and probably should, be seen through different eyes and retold for new audiences in new situations. The puzzle isn't just about who copied whom. The real question it leaves us with is this: how do we retell the stories that matter most to us for our own time?